Please welcome Jairi Karadins, CDO, Ford Otosan, Vadim Kulik, Deputy President and Chairman of the Management Board, VTB Bank, Fabian Schaefer, Director, Advanced Analytics, Magnet, Martin Wilcox, VP of Technology, EMEA Teradata, Islam Zekry, CDO, Commercial International Bank, Egypt, and moderator Peter High, President, Metis Strategy.
Well, thank you everyone for joining this event. Thank you to my fellow speakers. We're very much looking forward to a dynamic conversation today. So this topic, the data leaders and the future of innovation, this is certainly a topic of great importance across organizations. I've had a chance on multiple occasions in recent months to poll chief information officers, chief data officers, chief digital officers about the areas of greatest emphasis during this very strange time of pandemic. And data and analytics continues to be at or near the top of the priorities. Data continues to be a topic of high investment through the pandemic as well, even as other parts of organizations are experiencing cost reductions for obvious reasons. Data is more important than ever to leverage to gain insights about how to better run one's operation, how to drive digital revenue streams, to gain insights about one's customers. And what's interesting is the chief data officer role is still relatively new, only a few years old, but expanding substantially. In the United States, where I sit, for example, Gartner projects that the 75% of the top 1,000 companies by revenue will have a chief data officer by the end of next year. But what's interesting is, what is the purview of that person's role? Are they influencers trying to, as best they can, influence the data strategy of the rest of the organization, or are they truly drivers of change? How about the data itself? Should it be centralized? Should it be federated out into the organization? Is a hybrid the most appropriate solution? What are the broader people, process, and technology implications to all of this? Well, we will cover all of the above in this conversation and more. So very much looking forward to it. So let's begin. I'd like to begin with Martin Wilcox, VP of EMEA for Teradata. Martin, you head up, as I say, an EMEA-wide team of enterprise architects, data scientists, and cloud architects charged with helping Teradata's EMEA customers to define and execute their data and analytics strategies. I want to actually start with that question about the best way to think about data within the organization from your perspective. There are some that would say that it's best centralized, having a person whose purview is to drive the broader implications of how data is used across the entire organization. There are those that say data must reside closest to where the business is done. Others think that a hybrid model is best. And I recognize that there are some challenges to painting with too broad a brush stroke, so to say. But what are your perspectives on this?
So I think, Peter, you've got to be clear about whether you're talking about architecture or organization before we have this conversation. I think in general terms, if we're interested in optimizing complex end-to-end business processes, then we're going to need some level of integration of the data. Very, very difficult to do complex optimization end-to-end without that integrated view. So at some level, integrated data and integrated data platform is a critical capability of pretty much all the analytic leaders. Now, there are traps there for the unwary as well that maybe we'll get a chance to talk about later. I think we were, as an industry a couple of years ago, we were over-engineering solutions in some cases and integrating data for the sake of integrating data. And not all data have equal value. So we need to take care that we're integrating the right data. I sometimes talk about, just enough integration just in time. But I think in general, particularly for the data assets, they're going to be reused and shared across the organization that support the optimization of those complex end-to-end business processes. We need an integrated and a centralized data foundation. It doesn't automatically follow that we need a very centralized data organization, though. And I think actually you can make a very good case for a much more hybrid model. I think if you devolve all the responsibility to individual business units, typically what you get is a spaghetti architecture, lots of silos, high levels of technical debt, resistant. It makes it very difficult to change the business. I think if you over-centralize organizationally, then there's a risk that data analytics, digitization become that thing that IT or just the CDO need to care about. And I think, if we've learned anything through the pandemic recently, it's that, creating a digital business is everybody's business within the organization. We used to talk about the business and the digital business. And I think it's very, very clear now that there is only one business, and increasingly that business will be more and more digitized. So digitization, it's critical that it's a whole organization endeavor, I think. And you see that very clearly in the leading organizations.
That's interesting. I want to turn to Fabian Schaefer, the Advanced Analytics Director at Magnet, one of the largest food retailers in Russia. Fabian, you joined that company in May, so still relatively new in your role. And what a time to join a company during the course of a pandemic and presumably a quarantine by and large. But as you are relatively new to your organization, and there are, I'm sure, many people who are watching and listening to us, you've gone through the exercise relatively recently of evaluating the maturity of the data function within your company. And I wonder, as a guidepost for others who might wish to go through the same sort of exercise, whether they're new to their journey or not, what are some of the things that you are evaluating and you have evaluated, whether at Magnet or earlier in your career, to assess the maturity of the data function?
Okay. I would first of all argue that this will be an ongoing process for quite some time. So it's not that something I spend 2 months looking at and then say, okay, this is what we will do, but this is still ongoing. When we are doing this at Magnet, I like to split it into 3 categories. There's the first one, data that the central data function already has been responsible for in the past and continues to be responsible for. And there it's more a maturity assessment. How happy is the organization with the service that we provide? What's the quality of data? Do we meet the SLAs? Then there's a second bucket of data that is currently organized in a decentralized way. People still working in their own sandboxes. There, our task is more understanding should we centralize? And if we want to centralize, how do we do this? In order to cut back on duplication of KPIs, duplication of efforts. From centralizing this, we think that quite a bit of the investments that we need to make in order to get the data function to the maturity that we want to have will come from reducing some of the duplications of efforts that we have. And then there is a third bucket, which for us is quite crucial at the moment. And that's data that we not necessarily needed in the past or didn't have in the past, but will need in the future. In 2019, we launched our loyalty program, collecting tons of data and helping us to connect the dots. Just 2 weeks ago, we launched our first pilots in e-commerce. And obviously, those things will shift the demand for data quite a bit. And understanding how do we meet the requirements of the future is like a third bucket, where we also need to assess what direction do we need to change into. And combining all 3 efforts, I think that is what a good data strategy is about, and that is what we are currently working on.
Fabian, thank you. I appreciate that. Islam Zekry, I'd like to move to you. You are the Chief Data Officer at Commercial International Bank in Cairo. As we talk about data, it's very easy to quickly go to the technical aspects of that, the technology that the data flows through, the methods in which it's synthesized, and so forth. But there's a real cultural element. And as somebody, by contrast to Fabian, who we just heard from, who's relatively new to his current role, you've been in your role for 7 years. And so you've seen the evolution of this. And I'm sure, no doubt, like Fabian, go through an ongoing exercise of assessing the progress or lack thereof in various aspects of its use. But I wanted to ask you about the role of culture and the role of people ultimately, because it is the job of people to be the stewards of this, as well as those who to make decisions based upon what the data is telling them. So the critical input as well as the critical output has people all over that. Talk a bit about the cultural elements, if you would.
Thank you, Peter, for bringing this to the table, actually, because data is just generated by people, consumed by people, and at the end of the day, manufactured and industrialized by people, consumed by our customers at the end. And if that is a critical part of your business model, that will make a lot of sense for your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, including consumers and shareholders. So I'm happy actually to shift this. You exactly explained the discussion from the physics of the data management in general to the economics of building a data-led kind of a model within a bank. Banking is a legacy industry where most of the 20 and 25% return on equity is generated from very broad focused kind of a strategy, rather than building something really data-driven, which means, in other words, a very consumer-focused kind of a setup or a customer propositions. When you look around the globe, even after the COVID especially, you'll notice that there are big companies or big valuations. Most of them, either an American company tried to build a driverless cars, or a Chinese company tried to build a sort of a social clustering model in order to extend credit, or an African company tried to extend data for someone, or a Swiss-based company where the most of the tests on the treatments and the vaccines are tested on DNA data sets rather than a real human being. So technically, those companies are in different continents, they are around the globe, but the only shared element between all of them, that all of them are data intense kind of a company, data intense kind of a business model. And when you try to build the kind of a very informative or data intense business model like that, you need a different culture, very entrepreneurial kind of a culture, because you have to be ready to change everything overnight, whether the product design, the manufacturing processes, or even the contact strategy with your consumers in general. You have to be ready to change the way you run your internal innovations and labs, because currently innovation will become a sort of a business growth strategy rather than a fancy element, part of your cultural change stuff you are putting here and there. Your performance management and the way you run your human capital in general, the selection criteria, the job description, the way we do business, within the bank, the way we do pricing, the way we design products, all of that changed over the past 5-6 years. So the culture, the data transformation is a cultural transformation at the first step.
Great insights. Thank you so much, Islam, for sharing those. I'd like to bring Hayriya Karadeniz into the conversation as well. Hayriya, you're the Chief Digital Officer at Ford Otosan. And as the Chief Digital Officer, the other CDO, if you will, from the Chief Data Officer, how do you see the digital organization, the IT organization, and frankly, the IT and digital strategy meshing with the data strategy? Are they two parts of the same plan? Does the IT and digital strategy become formulated in the data strategy as an outcome of that? How do you see the interplay between those, please?
Maybe, thank you, Peter. Maybe first I also mention about that I have multiple hats, but one of them is also Chief Data Officer. After the personal data protection law has been enacted in Turkey in 2016, till that I am also the Chief Data Officer, so with multiple hats. As you said, the digital transformation and the data they are going hand in hand. So it's not possible to think a data strategy, or it's not possible to think a digital transformation strategy without a data strategy. So we already aligned them. Maybe it is also good to say that there are no separate strategies. We have only one company vision and mission, and also under those we are keeping all of them aligned with that strategy. And so I can say that when you think the digital transformation only as optimization, maybe you can miss that one. But when you think about the transformation, I think the data is just at the center of that transformation, because you need to get insight, you need to create the value just if you can have some initiatives related with data. So along our digital transformation strategy, as I tried to explain, data-oriented company, to become a data-oriented company and create revenue from data is one of the critical sub-strategy under digital transformation.
That's excellent. Thank you. And forgive me, you have both the D's in your
Yes.
title as well, the digital and the data. Very good to have those combined. And so to make sure that that alignment that you described happens that much more easily. You don't have to throw plans across a wall to somebody else who has the other side of that. Vadim Kulik, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, please. You are the Deputy President and Chairman of VTB Bank Management Board. VTB Group is the second largest bank in Russia. You have, I would say, unusual, at least from my background, in speaking with executives at your level within banking groups, an academic as well as a business background in data. And so have a great appreciation for the importance of data strategy. And I wonder if you can take a moment, if you would, and talk about some of the interesting case examples, as well as the value you have derived from data within the context of VTB Group.
Спасибо за
Thank you
возможность
for this opportunity to join you. I could tell that building business processes and building business models based on data. In fact, we did that for a long while, and initially it was all around and about scoring models, how to process a credit, how to approve a loan. Some time ago in Russia, it was launched an internal, I would call it an arms race. And that way, inside this industry, there was an explosion that brought about the need to process big data. Because the better your source of data, the larger is your database, and the more complex it is, different varieties, the better is your technical performance. So this internal competition within the industry in Russia is at a certain stage when all the participants arrive to a point that the next stage of competition will be won by those entities that will be able to predict well in advance whether an individual needs a loan or not, or in fact what the person would like to buy with that. So the objective that we are facing now, I'll describe it shortly, is to try and predict that right now this particular individual needs a specific object he would like to buy or consume, and to try and predict what should be the channel that will be deliver the message to that person that this particular kind of goods would be available using a credit, using a loan right now, and to predict a certain way, a certain form that this service could be delivered to him. So this maximal optimization up to the every individual, whether this person is inclined to a certain way, a certain channel of dialogue, or the way to receive a message, to deliver and to predict the outcome, and then to further manage the procedure. So this overall objective on the of competition is a whole series of predictive models. And the first set of that is to try and predict the need, the consumer's need. And then we have this objective of how to add up the data from different sources so that we collect the input and we'll try and catch the moment. For example, there was a product when we predict that the family will have a child, or it already has a child, 1 year to 3 years old, and we've prepared the following product: a debit card with great cashback in child goods, great discount for maternity and associated goods, and then possibility to connect via remote medical service to a hospital. So what we got as a result, we managed to predict and deliver the whole bundle either using SMS or push noticing or emails or using a call center. So we have collected what type of conversation and what should be the voice, male or female. So we have been predicting those options. So comparing the efficiency of this approach, we saw that a standard campaign with a pre-approved products, when we handle certain segments of population and provide pre-approved products, that was about 2% efficiency. While the efficiency of this custom-made product, a little bit more complicated, that was up to 7%. So in fact, we increased the response manifold. And as we have it now, there's an ongoing competition of programs like that to see what is more specific, what is more accurate. You know, the bad offers, the irrelevant offers, and there's a rain of those. And those banking structures that will be able to predict with higher accuracy particular needs and requirements of an individual to buy something, those will be winning the race.
Yep.
We involve several more models, different platforms to be used, like one of those called CDO platform, so that I understand that you're, let's say you're walking by a shopping mall and we know that you have been looking for certain goods in the internet and you have some wishes. So you are probably for a specific purpose. So we can combine your walking routine so that you go past specific shops within that mall and your credit will be helping you. So that we're doing not exactly the context of your shopping wish list, but you're also linking your actual geographical position in a particular street. Another pilot that we're going to launch is advertising, understanding that what you want to buy as an individual. In downtown city, we'll have a display. On display, we'll have not just paper ads, but we'll have TV type displays. And depending on who is approaching, the screen will show the goods you're looking for.
Yes, yes.
Depending on how many people with specific needs are walking past that particular display.
Spasiba, Vadim, thank you for those examples. Very, very interesting indeed. In many ways, describing where this is headed. Some of the more sophisticated applications of these data practices. So thank you for those examples. Martin, I'd like to return to you. You highlighted that it's important to integrate the right data, using your terminology there. And I wonder if you can kind of unwrap that a little bit further, so to say. What do you mean by that, and how should organizations be thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the dirty little secret about integrating data, managing data across a large and complex organization is that it's hard, right? You know, I'm a physicist by training, and the second law of thermodynamics applies, right? You know, the universe is a dark and nasty place, and chaos is the default position. And if we want to create order out of chaos, we have to work hard, we have to expend energy. And I think it's the same with an organization's data assets. And then, you know, this becomes like any other decision in a large and complex organization. How much effort do we want to expend? Where do we want to expend it? And what's the payback? And I think, you know, because integrated data in general is good and is important for optimizing end-to-end business processes, there was a feeling a little while in the industry ago that we'll kind of integrate everything. And the start point of every project will be, you know, a 6 or 12-month endeavor where we model the data in great detail and then create this beautiful infrastructure. Oh, and then we'll go talk to the users and try and find out, you know, what we're trying to accomplish and which business processes we're trying to automate or improve or remove friction from. And of course, you know, ultimately that ends up just being completely the wrong way around. And I think at the speed that modern business operates at, you know, no one's interested in spending 12 or 18 months in building infrastructure before we can improve a single business process. So we have to, as an industry, find ways of taking friction out of that process. And I think we have, by and large, established really good best practices for taking friction out of those processes. And those really come down to integrating the data that's going to be shared and reused at the point that we need to integrate that data, and not, in some cases, months or years in advance. And I think this really comes back to some of the points that Islam was making about the importance of having a data strategy. You know, I think the first thing I would say about a data strategy is the first thing is to have one. And I think there's been some recent Accenture research that suggests that lots of organizations still don't, and that there's a very strong correlation between organizations that have a data strategy and organizations that are succeeding with the kind of machine learning and AI initiatives that Vadim was talking about just now. I think the second thing is that, you know, increasingly the data strategy is the business strategy. It's really, really important that we're not just repeating platitudes about becoming a data-driven business. What are the key imperatives for the business? How can data and analytics improve those key imperatives for the business? And is that where we're focused? And it becomes really important that that is where we're focused. I think the third thing, and this also comes back to some of the things that I think both Hariya and Vadim were saying, is we used to have a British Prime Minister that used to say, what matters is what works. And I see a lot of organizations at the moment almost pursuing innovation for the sake of innovation. But, you know, it doesn't matter how many smart data scientists you have in your innovation lab. If the innovation that they generate, the insight that they generate never leaves the lab except as PowerPoint slides, probably you're not really changing the business. And if you're not changing the business, then there is no return on investment. And then lastly, I think the fourth thing is to have a portfolio approach, because we know not all of these projects are going to work and going to pay back. So it becomes important to identify the strategic areas of importance for the business, to identify supporting use cases, and then to characterize those use cases by potential return to the business, but also feasibility. And to go after, if you will, to use that terrible cliche, go after the low-hanging fruit and seek to build that integrated data platform, but to build it one data product at a time, each of which has a return on investment, each of which has a payback for the business.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Martin. Thank you for those comments. Fabian, back to you. Inherent in some of what Martin was talking about is in the early stages as you're developing these plans, developing your strategy, is the notion of quick wins, finding opportunities to also develop some momentum to this, in addition, of course, to developing the ultimate strategy, which is part and parcel of the rest of the plans of the organization. How do you think about, Fabian, how do you think about some of those early kind of quick wins, leveraging data to prove to the organization both its importance, but also how to continue to expand that?
Yeah, so I think quick wins are very crucial to justify the investment that's needed into the data organization. And I'm lucky that I took over a team that had some very interesting products that were close to release. And then shortly after I came on board, I did receive some of the praise for launching them, whether it's a very great DMP to monetize the customer data, some of the use cases that we do on shelf availability, on promo, that are in principle working quite well. But when we are talking about then scaling those quick wins or getting more value off the table, that is very often then linked to actually getting the basics right. So after having seen something work in an area, it can be that the business function, whether it's HR, operations, supply chain, comes to you and say, okay, fine, please do the same for me. And then very often it's the case that while there are some quick fixes that you can do and something that you can do to generate value on the existing data, very often those products wouldn't be sustainable unless you address the underlying issues first. So there is a risk to get bogged down into too many commitments in regards to quick wins, and they stop you from systematically fixing what's wrong in order to maximize the value that you get in the long term. So there is clearly a trade-off, and however, I fully understand the business wants to see that you can deliver, and those quick wins are typically a way to prove your value, and yeah, that's why we're also happily doing them.
Wonderful. Yes. Islam, I really liked your notion of changing from the physics to the economics of data, improving the value in many ways, again, echoing some of the statements Fabian was just talking about with regard to that pivot. You also alluded to, in brief, the dichotomy between the offense versus the defense aspects of data. And I wonder if you could delve into that a little bit more deeply as to that dichotomy, as well as organizations' tendency to perhaps focus on one versus the other, as opposed to what I believe you would argue is ensuring that there's a good balance between those.
Well, actually, data became a very, very big business right now. That's why I want to also reposition the role of the chief data officer as the chief executive officer of data business, because that's a change in the business model anyway. So technically, we have to be extremely pragmatic about the balance between what's really defensive and what's really offensive. So this is, a very American sports kind of a theme to describe the data strategies in general. So being defensive is just simply focusing on the privacy, security issues of the data, which is extremely important, and we need to take care of our assets if we consider that as a real asset. And on the other side, we have to extremely offensive, go and score high, and enhance our value creation model. And if you ask me, there is no need to focus on the low-hanging fruits as long as you are linking your data strategy to the overall organization strategy. Especially in the businesses, regardless the complexity of the business, the profit formula is very, very easy. So either you will enhance your revenue side by increase your customers' willingness to pay, or enhance your production cost by reducing the marginal cost of the production in general, whether this industry is banking or manufacturing or whatever. The beauty of data as an asset in general, it is not obsolete over time, so there is no depreciation for the data. You will increase and amplify the value of data over time. Whenever you use data more, most probably you'll generate more value out of the data. This is one thing. Another thing, you could reach the two goals simultaneously at the same time just by using data. If you are in manufacturing facility, you need to acquire a production line to increase the scale and minimize the marginal cost, or launch a marketing campaign. While you are using your data asset, you could hit the two targets at the same time without the need to do both. And by following that path, most probably your business teams, your operations teams, your branch network, your digital teams will work for you, because at the end of the day, you are enhancing your P&L, you are amplifying the value creation model, you are optimizing the classic way of creating value for your shareholders. And I think that's what pushed Harvard and LBS a couple of years ago to focus on CIB as one of the successful data transformational programs within Africa and the Middle East, because we manage that balance between the defense and offense, amplify the economic value, measure the economic value, and at the same time, we are taking quite care of our data assets in general.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Hayriya, I'd like to go back to you. In the automotive industry, in which you're a part of, can you talk a bit about how data is used from an operational perspective, as well as bearing in mind customer experience and finding opportunities to enhance that as well? Talk a bit about this sort of more expansive way in which you're evaluating and leveraging data in order to draw conclusions that impact both your company as well as your company's customers.
Okay. I also, maybe I can add some words on top of Martin and Islam, because as they said, I think the data strategy and also all those use cases or the value creation is very related how you make that governance, and also how you are just managing all those change. So it must be a kind of not a responsibility of any IT, or it must be responsibility of any team. It's a responsibility of whole organization. So maybe what we are doing for that, we are also trying to change our way of working. So we are also in a transformation of enterprise agility. So how we can manage all those change as teams, which are just focused on creating value and also producing some increments and also products, data products. So I think that's also very important, how we are managing and or how we are just try to create that value and products. So when I just come back to your questions, yes, data and big data and analytics are, you know, that mostly referred as the future currency. So we know that, but it's also a growth catalyst for next generation automotive. It's very important for automotive world, but it also takes too long to move from data to information and to wisdom. It's also a hard work. So what we are doing, we do use data in our operations, from manufacturing to supply chain, from customer review to customer behaviors, and we collect data widely to improve our manufacturing, supply chain tracking, and also, of course, understanding the customer and providing them best available experience. Maybe I can just briefly give some examples. Later on, if we have time, I can give also some figures. In our operations, maybe it will be a kind of conflict to Martin, but we already connected all our sensors, robots to one single manufacturing IoT platform, because before that we calculate the value, and we saw that after connecting all those sensors, robots, PLCs, we start tracking our company or our manufacturing in real time, and we are able to detect the bottlenecks. It's very important in manufacturing. Cycle time tracking is performed for every station. So we could able to start analyzing those cycle times and problems, and we could able to detect the production line slowdown processes. So it was very important for us to make a kind of digital twin of the factory. At the customer experience side, of course, with the help of that all the digital transformation, because we made our digital transformation strategy not only for manufacturing at all areas, as customer, production, employee, manufacturing, supply chain. So with that one, we deployed a new customer experience platform. So that platform serves to both our customers and dealers. And we are using data analytics to understand customer needs and also offer some customized products for our customers. And also, of course, the demand forecasting is also very important for automotive. Nowadays, maybe it's not easy, but you need to really have a very good demand forecasting. Otherwise, it means that you need to maybe keep more stock, or because we are still producing some physical products, and it's a long term, and it's also really very expensive to produce. So you need to use data. And also not only in, as I said, customer, for example, in product development side, we also have some connected products, connected vehicle. We have some connected vehicles. So under that one, for example, our engineers, electrical team discovered some battery problems. So it was also a very good case. So we use telemetry data, and we could also give some services with that telemetry data, both to customers and also to our engineers. So as a summary, as I said, data is just at the core of our all transformation. And we are also looking to find some more cases and also change all our clients in our company to use data more and get more wisdom from that data.
Thank you. That's a great overview, Hayriye. Thank you so much. Vadim, I'd like to turn back to you. Quite a sophisticated series of opportunities that you described and offerings that you described that you've through the bank have offered to your customers. In some ways, a very full blossoming of the data products and experiences on their behalf. I wonder, can you maybe as advice to others, can you talk about some of the key elements of what you and the executive team put in place in order to bring this to life for those organizations that may be a step or two or three behind you in terms of their maturity? What were some of the key ingredients, people, processes, or technologies in order to bring that to life more fully?
Ну, я бы сказал следующее. Первое — это
I
команда.
would say the following. First is having a team. If you don't have a nucleus for a team to have a start, then it makes sense because you will have to demonstrate the first result. And then you have to tackle an area where the models are not so complex and not too many of them. And then the data is relatively available so that you can demonstrate your success, the initial success. And then you will see for yourself as the owner of the business processes, you will raise your hand and say, I would like to join that process. So it will be important for you to scale up in the right way the structure inside your big organization. So it should be scalable regionally. And you have to understand what platforms are you going to build and develop inside your organization. Because managing model risks and risks that have to do with data, we're not covering that actually today, but that's a whole big thing to discuss. The number of models, when it comes to thousands in about 200 business processes, you understand this is becoming a nightmare, and you have to switch between those, and some of them will have to be switched off. So there's a whole layer of managing big data, big figures. So in the very beginning, you'll need to think it over. How do I make it right from the onset? How give it examples? How to develop a platform with your developers. Do what you have to store your data safely. And number 4 is to have a look around, see what are the other data volumes available. What I can see, you'll have a breakthrough only when you have a product which is built on cross-industry data. So where you stepped outside of your frontiers, where exactly you have this way of possibly joining data, uniting data, and then the products will be selling better. So you have to build yourself as an open architecture, open and available for exchange. The more you can exchange data with other entities, also called surrogate data, the more you will have the options to develop internally. As I see it, this should be a key to develop and grow.
Vadim, thank you for those comments. Very, very important wisdom for others to follow. Absolutely. Martin, I'd like to return to you as the one person on our digital dais who has reason to work with so many other companies, influence so many other companies on this journey. I wonder if you can highlight a few of the best practices you did already with some of your responses previously, but in a similar vein to the question that I posed to Vadim, I'd be interested in your perspectives on what do you recommend as you for organizations that have begun this journey how do they continue to advance this to make sure that they're reaching towards higher levels of value ultimately that they're deriving from this? And maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing a best practice or two, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the best practices is something that we've already touched on a couple of times, right? And Hariri just gave a beautiful example of the value of integrated data, right? When I was talking earlier about, I mean, if you want to optimize the cycle time of a robot, that's interesting, right? But I think what Hariri was talking about was, what if I want to optimize the cycle time of the entire assembly line? And that's a lovely example, I think, of moving from, system analysis to system of system analysis. And if you want to do that system of system analysis, that's another example of optimizing an end-to-end business process, right? And I completely agree that integrated data is absolutely critical for that. Can't be done without it. So I think integrating the data that makes sense, as Hariri explained to us, that's a critical best practice. When I talk about just enough integration, just in time, that's not an argument for not integrating data. It's an argument for being intentional about which data we integrate first, and how aggressively we model and integrate that data. And that goes back to this importance of having a data strategy that's aligned with the business strategy, and understanding which data are going to be combined, reused, shared widely across the organization, because they are the data that we want to spend most time managing, integrating, curating, right? So that goes right the way back to Islam's point about data strategy. And I think Fabian also put that point very well as well. And also Hariri's point about the value of integrated data. I also think if we're talking about emerging best practices, I think the point that Vadim made is incredibly important, right? So I think for the last couple of years in the industry, we've tended to regard machine learning and AI as an algorithm problem. And I don't think they're algorithm problems at all. I think they're a data problem. I think they're a data problem for a couple of reasons. First, the models are only as good as the data that we use to train them. And the predictions that they make are only as good as the data that we use when we're scoring them, right? But I think that the more subtle point, which I think is the point that Vadim was making, is that if we're talking about ubiquitous machine learning, about machine learning underpinning pretty much all the business processes in our organizations, being the basis of competitive advantage in very many industries, then we are talking about deploying machine learning at a scale that we haven't until relatively recently. I think I've been in Teradata for 16 years. When I joined the company, most of the big banks in the UK had about 50 predictive models in production, 25 in credit risk. Should I extend an offer for credit to Peter? And another 25, sorry, in marketing, and 25 in credit risk. If I do, will he pay it back? If you look into the very near future, we think at Teradata that best practice in demand forecasting in grocery retail, for example, is increasingly to have one predictive model to do demand forecasting for each store product combination. Well, in a decent sized European grocery retailer, that's 150 million predictive models just to run an effective supply chain that need to be scored every day. And to Vadim's point, that's a data problem, because the performance of those models will drift over time. So understanding where those models have been deployed, which version's been deployed, what's the current accuracy of those predictions, which models need to be revised and enhanced, which models need to be retired, that is a data problem. And it's a really, really big data problem as well. So I think best practices, yes, focus on integration, number one. Two, be intentional about that integration. Integrate the data that matter to deliver your data strategy, which must be aligned with your business strategy. Absolutely think about why you're doing this. And to Vadim's point, increasingly very many of us are doing this to support ubiquitous machine learning. And then, fourthly, I think the best practice is get the organization structure right, and I think a hybrid organization and a matrix organization in general, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution, but in general, that's the kind of best compromise between accountability, but also making sure that the entire organization comes on this digitization journey.
Great insights there and great recommendations. Thank you for that. Islam, I'd like to return to you. The average tenure of a chief data officer is still less than 2 years, which highlights that some combination of the leadership team doesn't feel like they're getting what they expected out of the leader that has been put in place, and perhaps the leader, him or herself, isn't providing, it hasn't structured things, organized things to communicate that value effectively. As somebody of long tenure, talk a bit about what you would recommend. What do you see as sort of the necessary ingredients for success, for longevity in the role, and obviously, as a consequence of that, the value of the role itself?
I think again that will take us to the maturity level of the industry by itself. You need to align yourself exactly to the strategy in general. You need to understand deeply the value creation model and how banking creates, or how auto industry creates the value for the consumers and shareholders, and then build the right analytics roadmap, if you ask me, that aligns completely with that value creation model. This is very important. And at the same time, if you ask me today what kind of a roadmap I build for CIB, and if I move tomorrow to a European or American bank, that will be the same, absolutely that will be different. On the top of my priority for now, if you ask me, because I'm working on a bank in Egypt, and the willingness to pay and the risk rationalization on the top of the modeling agenda. So basically consumer and marketing analytics, risk analytics, then operation optimization we have within the bank and OR team. If you move to Europe, most probably you'll find that on Volvo or one of the auto companies. You'll not find it in a bank because we still have a big room to optimize. So technically, aligning the analytical roadmap to the bank or to the organization strategy in general is a critical thing. Another thing is prove to your business partners or to your stakeholders in general, because the stakeholders in data business are not just the business, but there are multiple players on the operation side, on the communication side, even outside the bank. There are multiple players you could cooperate with, because data in general will transform the business model into very, very collaborative kind of a business model over time. And that's what we noticed here in CIB. We start signing data monetization agreements 3 years ago. We collaborate with banks. We have integration with small fintechs at less than 1% of our size. We have integration with companies like Uber or the service providers within the country or the African movement. The focus on data also inspire us to start re-envisioning the whole business model. Now we are rethinking of CIB as a platform rather than a company expanding by M&A as an only mean to expand overseas. We are expanding in Africa through acquisitions. We are expanding in Africa through collaborative models also. So technically, that will help the decision makers in general to revisit the whole business strategy, and you have to be there. That's one thing. Another important thing we highlighted earlier, basically the cultural aspects. You need to get people around you. The chief data officer needs to be the chief diplomat officer and run the discussions with technologists, with business partners, with operators, with colleagues around the table in a very, very diplomatic manner, because at the end of the day, we need to reach that balance between the defensive and the offensive approach, as we highlighted earlier. We need to set a success criteria for the data transformational program, which is a tricky thing. If you deal with that as pure business, they will ask you about your P&L, about your realization of income, and so on. And the accounting gap is not accepting data and information as a capital right now. These are the real accounting gaps, the general accepted accounting principles, I mean. They don't accept information as real assets. So technically, how you realize the value, you need to have a very, very smart approach also for the way you'll assess the performance and assess the uplift impact of your data initiatives in general. Finally, the leadership, and how to build the leadership around that, and how to align the interest around the executive leadership. All of that will factor in the value index, if you want to say, of the organization by itself, especially if you are running a listed organization or open listed organization like the one I'm operating in.
That's fantastic. Well, I think we've got maybe a minute, Heidi. There's a question from the audience. What's your company's strategy for using cloud analytics solutions? Can you forgive me for asking a larger question and suggesting we just take a minute for it, but would love to hear your perspective on that if you would.
We are already using some cloud analytics. As the example that I give you about the connected vehicle, we are already using those cloud analytics, but in Turkey regulation, we have some limits. So that's also make us to implement more on-prem systems, because we need to keep data in local environments. But with anonymous data and also without any personal data, we are using cloud analytics in our digital services. I don't know if it is clear.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Yes, no, I think so. I appreciate that. Well, good. I want to thank everyone for this great session. A lot of really good lessons that I'm pulling from this. Martin's comments about the need to develop that hybrid between the centralized versus the federated organization, to go from this chaos as the default position to, through a better strategy, to marshal better resources and a better approach, the value of integrated data that he talked about. And ultimately, the data is the centerpiece of fully realizing the value of AI and ML. Fabian's comments about the assessment of maturity and the necessity to understand where do we stand and where are we and how do we continue to improve to become more necessary. Also, his comments about the need for quick wins to build momentum. I really liked Islam's comments about moving from the physics to the economics of data, proving through the value that you're deriving that this is something that the organization needs to focus on, but also having that balance between the offensive and the defensive aspects of this. In addition to some of his comments just a moment ago about the ways to build the longevity of this organization and ultimately the leader, him or herself, by creating that value, creating that momentum and enthusiasm. Haria had a number of very interesting comments. Her points about going from data to information to wisdom and the importance of managing that appropriately. She also spoke, as others did, about the need for that integrated strategy and making sure that the digital strategy, the data strategy, the enterprise strategy are in fact aligned and in many cases sort of one and the same, if you will, perhaps with different segments. She had a number of great examples of both the customer aspects of this in addition to the operational aspects. And finally, Vadim, who offered so many interesting examples of some of the best use cases of data and ways to derive value and create truly delightful experiences through truly, as he put it, predictive models, getting to the point where your data is organized well enough to be able to predict the needs and wants of your customers and deliver them perhaps even before they recognize it themselves. So Martin, Haria, Fabian, Islam, Vadim, thank you so much for a wonderful session. And thank you all for joining us today.